Clouds of pale gold drifted lazily across the ceiling, refusing to stay still no matter how many times I blinked. Soft morning light poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting long streaks across polished hardwood and silk sheets that smelled faintly of sandalwood, expensive cologne, and a man. Not just any man. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, hidden beneath the pounding ache splitting my skull apart and the uncomfortable weight pressing against every muscle in my body. My mouth tasted like champagne and regret. Every breath carried traces of last night's alcohol, stubbornly clinging to the back of my throat as scattered fragments of laughter, flashing lights, and crystal glasses flickered through my mind before disappearing again. Nothing made sense. The room certainly didn't. This wasn't my bedroom. It wasn't even my apartment. Everything surrounding me screamed obscene wealth. The curtains looked custom-made. Fresh lilies rested inside a crystal vase taller than my knee. A black marble fireplace stretched across one wall, while a panoramic view of Manhattan glowed beyond the windows, like the city itself had been framed for someone's private collection. A hotel. A very expensive one. My pulse quickened. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself upright. Every tiny movement made my head protest, forcing another sharp wince from my lips. The silk comforter slipped down my shoulder, and cool air brushed against bare skin. Bare skin. My heart stopped. No blouse, no dress, no bra, only an oversized white shirt hanging loosely over my body. A man's shirt. Confusion exploded into outright panic. What? The word barely escaped before movement beside me froze every thought inside my head. Someone else was in the bed. Broad shoulders, dark hair scattered carelessly across a pillow, one powerful arm resting above the blanket as though he hadn't a single worry in the world. No, absolutely not. Every ounce of sleep evaporated. I turned fully toward him, then wished I hadn't. Cassian Blackwood. Out of every person in New York, out of every hotel, out of every nightmare my exhausted mind could have imagined, it had to be him. The man who spent years infuriating me with every smug smile that crossed his face. The billionaire every business magazine called New York's youngest corporate genius. The insufferably arrogant man who somehow managed to appear wherever my family conducted negotiations. The man I'd sworn never to willingly speak to again after our disastrous encounter 3 years ago. The man lying peacefully beside me, half naked. Heat flooded my face. A horrified scream tore from my throat before I even realized it. Cassian! His eyes opened immediately, not startled, not confused, almost amused. That only made me angrier. Without thinking, I shoved both hands against his shoulder with every bit of strength I had. You psychopath! Completely unprepared for the attack, he rolled clean off the opposite side of the bed with an undignified thud that echoed across the suite. What the? You disgusting! The nearest pillow flew at his head. What are you doing in my room? Another pillow, then the decorative cushion, then whatever my hand touched next. Cassian caught the final pillow effortlessly before it reached his face. My room. What? My room. His deep morning voice remained frustratingly calm. This happens to be my presidential suite. The revelation blurred my thought. What? He leaned one shoulder against the side of the bed before slowly standing. Unfortunately, very unfortunately, he wasn't wearing much more than I was. Black lounge pants hung low around his waist. Nothing else. Every magazine cover had failed to mention just how unfairly attractive the man actually was in person. Years inside tailored suits had hidden the broad chest, defined shoulders and lean muscle now shamelessly displayed beneath the morning sunlight. Infuriating. Absolutely infuriating. My eyes darted away so quickly they almost hurt. A low chuckle filled the room. So, his voice carried that familiar sarcasm I'd always wanted to strangle. Yesterday, you couldn't stop looking at me. I wasn't looking at you. You certainly weren't looking at the ceiling. I don't even remember yesterday. I noticed. His grin widened. That's hardly my fault. Every alarm bell inside my head began ringing at once. What? My voice came out much smaller. What happened? Instead of answering immediately, Cassian walked toward the minibar, poured himself a glass of water, drank half of it, then turned back to me with infuriating composure. You got drunk. I know that much. You became argumentative. I always become argumentative. You insulted approximately 6 investment bankers. You told one senator he had the personality of stale oatmeal. You stole the microphone from the live band. You attempted to fire your own fiancé. My stomach dropped. What? You don't remember? No. That's unfortunate. He looked almost disappointed. You were rather entertaining. I ignored that. My fiancé. A heavy knot settled inside my chest. Last night had been the Sterling Foundation Gala, the night my father officially announced my engagement. The engagement I never wanted. The engagement designed purely to strengthen another business alliance before handing everything I'd built over to my precious half-sister. I remembered arriving. I remembered smiling until my cheeks hurt. I remembered watching executives congratulate my sister for achievements that belonged to me. Then, nothing. Nothing after the champagne, nothing after the speeches, nothing after Cassian. You still haven't answered my question. He met my gaze. No. I asked what happened, and I heard you. Cassian. His expression shifted ever so slightly. Not softer, never softer, just more attentive. You drank far more than anyone should. So you wandered into the hotel lounge after leaving the gala. My brows knitted together. This hotel? My hotel. You argued with the pianist because he refused to play whatever heartbreak song you requested. You declared that every man in Manhattan suffered from inflated egos. You specifically mentioned me. Of course I did. You called me an emotionally constipated billionaire. That sounds like me. I agreed. You what? I've been called worse. Despite myself, despite every ounce of irritation still boiling beneath my skin, my lips almost twitched. Almost. Cassian noticed. Of course he noticed. You smiled. I absolutely did not. You almost did. I was suffering from temporary facial paralysis. His eyes gleamed with unmistakable satisfaction. I preferred the version of you that kept trying to climb into my lap. My entire body froze. Excuse me? You were remarkably affectionate. I don't believe you. You begged me not to leave. No. You wrapped both arms around my neck. No. You insisted I smelled nice. No. You called me, stop talking. Ridiculously handsome. Stop talking. His laughter filled the suite. Rich, low, genuine. The sound only made my embarrassment worse. You're lying. Am I? Yes. Instead of answering, he calmly walked closer. Too close. Before I could react, he rolled up the sleeve covering his forearm. 4 bright, crescent-shaped scratches crossed his skin. Fresh. Very fresh. My stomach sank. No! Another sleeve. More scratches. Then, without the slightest shame, he turned slightly to reveal the side of his neck. A cluster of unmistakable red marks disappeared beneath his collarbone. You also bite. My face burned so violently I thought I might actually burst into flames. Words abandoned me. I didn't. No. His eyebrow lifted. Interesting. He reached for his phone on the nightstand. Fortunately, the corner of his mouth curved into something dangerously smug. I documented some of your work. My horrified whisper escaped before I could stop it. You didn't? Cassian unlocked the screen. Oh, I definitely did. His eyes met mine with devastating amusement. His gum hovered over the screen. Every instinct screamed at me to snatch the phone out of his hand before whatever humiliation it contained could reach my eyes. Cassian? Don't. I thought you wanted proof. I've suddenly decided I don't. I noticed. The infuriating man looked almost disappointed. I was rather looking forward to watching you relive your finest performance. Before I could lunge across the bed, he casually slipped the phone back into his pocket. My hand stopped mid-air. You're not showing me. I've changed my mind. You've changed your... I find your imagination considerably more entertaining. A strangled noise escaped my throat. Every possible scenario immediately began parading through my mind, each one somehow more embarrassing than the last. Had I actually climbed into his lap? Had I kissed him first? Had I... No, absolutely not. Claire Sterling did not throw herself at arrogant billionaires, especially not this arrogant billionaire. He watched every emotion cross my face with infuriating patience before quietly asking, "Finished writing your own version of last night?" "I'm trying." "You've already imagined something worse than reality." "Have I?" "You looked terrified." "I am terrified." That earned another laugh. How did one person laugh so little yet somehow make it feel like he was winning every conversation? It was infuriating. So, I folded my arms, determined to regain at least a shred of dignity. Exactly how drunk was I? Cassian considered the question with suspicious seriousness. Do you know the woman downstairs who waters the orchids in the lobby every morning? No. You tried to convince her she deserved a promotion. You also hugged her. Twice. Please stop talking. You nearly adopted someone's golden retriever. You cried because you thought pigeons looked lonely. I closed my eyes. This is psychological warfare. It gets worse. Of course it does. You attempted to purchase a hot dog cart. My eyes flew open. I hate hot dogs. You announced you were investing in the owner's future. You called him, he paused as though searching for the exact words, the Warren Buffett of street food. He cried. You cried with him. A groan escaped before I buried my face in both hands. I want to disappear. I gathered that. I actually want the earth to open and swallow me. That seems excessive. No, excessive would have been if I'd proposed to someone. The room suddenly became suspiciously quiet. Very, very quiet. Slowly, I lowered my hands. Cassian was studying me with entirely too much interest. Why are you looking at me like that? No reason. Cassian? Why are you smiling? I'm debating whether or not to answer that. A terrible feeling settled into my stomach. Uh, answer what? You've just unknowingly eliminated one possibility. What possibility? Nothing. Cassian? He looked almost amused by my growing panic. You don't remember proposing. Every coherent thought abandoned me. He got down on one knee. It was quite heartfelt. You informed me my personality was still terrible, but apparently, his lips curved into that devastatingly smug smile again, my face compensated for it. Heat rushed through my body so quickly I thought I might actually pass out. You asked whether I'd consider becoming your emotional support billionaire. I did not. You did. I refuse to believe that. You also informed everyone nearby that if anyone else married me first, you'd object. Very passionately. Silence swallowed the room. Not because I had nothing to say, because there simply weren't words capable of expressing the level of horror consuming me. Finally, very quietly, I need another drink. You've had enough alcohol to last a month. I meant water. I know. He crossed toward the minibar again, poured another glass, and held it out to me. Our fingers brushed. Barely. The contact lasted no more than a heartbeat. Still, something strange happened. His teasing smile disappeared from his face. The amusement faded. His fingers lingered just a fraction longer than necessary before he slowly let go of the glass. An odd warmth spread through my chest. Not excitement, not exactly. Recognition. Like touching something familiar I'd forgotten existed. I hated it, as much as I hated the way he was looking at me now. Not smug, not sarcastic. Just quiet. Searching, as though making sure I was really all right. The softness vanished the instant I noticed it. So, his usual composure returned as if it had never left. Your headache? Horrible. Nausea? A little. Dizziness. I feel like Manhattan is gently spinning. You'll survive. Compassion clearly isn't one of your qualities. I save it for deserving people. There he is. The woman from last night would have appreciated my concern. The woman from last night was clinically incapable of making good decisions. So I've gathered. I took another sip of water before finally asking the question that had been hovering at the edge of my thoughts since waking. Why did you bring me here? The teasing disappeared completely. You were in no condition to go home. I could have called a cab. You did. I did? You attempted to pay the driver with your earrings. When he refused, you accused him of discriminating against diamonds. And after that? You insisted you weren't going back to the Sterling estate. My grip tightened around the glass. A dull ache settled somewhere much deeper than the hangover. Did I say why? Cassian's gaze remained steady. You said home didn't feel like home. The words hit harder than I expected, because they were true. Painfully true. The Sterling estate had never been home. It was simply the place where I'd spent 26 years earning everything, except love. My father loved appearances. My stepmother loved status. My half-sister loved taking credit. And me? I was useful. Useful people weren't cherished. They were worked, replaced, forgotten. Perhaps I'd known that for years. Perhaps the champagne had simply loosened the truth enough for it to escape. Cassian said nothing. For once, he didn't tease me, didn't offer one of his sarcastic remarks. He simply watched me with an expression I couldn't quite understand. It almost looked like anger, not directed at me, at someone else, someone unseen, someone who had hurt me. The thought should have been ridiculous. Instead, it unsettled me more than all his teasing combined. because, for one impossible moment, it felt as though I wasn't sitting across from my greatest enemy. It felt as though I was sitting across from the only person in New York who'd truly listened when I said I didn't want to go home. Looking away became suddenly impossible. Those steel gray eyes held mine with a quiet intensity that stripped away every sarcastic remark he'd thrown at me since waking up, leaving behind something infinitely more dangerous, because it wasn't arrogance or amusement anymore, but a silence so patient it almost felt familiar. And that frightened me far more than his teasing ever could. People like Cassian Blackwood weren't supposed to look at anyone that way. They certainly weren't supposed to look at me that way. The moment shattered beneath the shrill vibration of my phone. The sound cut through the suite like a knife. Both our eyes dropped toward the nightstand where my handbag rested beside the bed. My phone continued vibrating relentlessly, the screen lighting up again and again until one name finally came into focus. Ethan. A bitter knot immediately formed in my stomach. My fiancé, the man I was supposed to marry in less than 3 weeks. Without thinking, I reached for the phone, only for Cassian's hand to move first. He wasn't trying to stop me. He simply picked it up before I did, glanced at the screen for less than a second, then handed it to me with an unreadable expression. He's persistent. The understatement almost made me laugh. 38 missed calls, 12 unread messages, 5 voice notes. For someone who'd spent the previous evening barely acknowledging my existence, he suddenly seemed very interested in finding me. I should answer. Cassian said nothing. I swallowed, suddenly unsure why I felt the need to repeat myself. I should answer. I heard you the first time. His voice remained calm. So answer. Something about the way he said it irritated me. Aren't you going to make another sarcastic comment? I've made enough for one morning. I imagine you do. The phone continued vibrating in my hand. Finally, I accepted the call. Claire! Ethan's voice exploded through the speaker before I managed to even say hello. Where the hell have you been? I've been calling since 6 this morning. I instinctively pulled the phone away from my ear. I'm fine. Fine? He snapped. Do you have any idea what kind of position you've put me in? Your father has been asking questions all morning. Not, are you all right? Not, did you get home safely? Not even, I was worried. Instead, his first concern was himself. Somehow, after spending only a few minutes inside Cassian's suite, that realization struck harder than it had ever had before. I wasn't feeling well after the gala. You disappeared. I know. You embarrassed everyone. A hollow laugh almost escaped me. Embarrassed everyone. Not you embarrassed yourself. Not I'm glad you're safe. Just everyone. I'm sorry. You should be. His words landed with the cold precision of a business email, rather than concern from the man who was supposed to become my husband, and for reasons I couldn't explain, my eyes drifted toward Cassian. He hadn't moved. He wasn't pretending not to listen. He simply leaned one shoulder against the marble counter, his gaze fixed on me with an expression so unreadable that it was almost unsettling. Yet there was something quietly dangerous simmering beneath the surface of that calm composure, something that seemed to darken a little more every time Ethan opened his mouth. Anyway, Ethan continued, his irritation giving way to impatience. Where are you? I'll come get you. Before I could answer, Cassian reached for the coffee machine, pressing a button as though none of this concerned him in the slightest. My voice hesitated. Should I tell him? The silence stretched just long enough. Claire? I'm at a hotel. What hotel? Another pause. My eyes met Cassian's. He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He simply waited. I'm at the Grand Meridian. The line went deadly silent. Then, "What are you doing there?" How exactly was I supposed to answer that? I had too much to drink. "And you stayed there overnight?" "Yes." "Alone?" The question lingered between us. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out, because for the first time since waking up, I became painfully aware of how impossible this situation looked. I was standing barefoot inside another man's presidential suite, wearing his shirt with my hair an absolute disaster, while he quietly prepared coffee behind me, as though this sort of morning happened every day. There was no explanation believable enough to erase that picture.
"Claire," Ethan's voice had become dangerously quiet. "Are you alone?" Before I could force out another lie, Cassian's deep voice drifted effortlessly across the room. "The coffee will be ready in a minute." He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't spoken toward the phone. He hadn't even looked at me. He simply said it. That was all. Silence. Heavy. Oppressive. Then Ethan spoke again. "Who was that?" I slowly closed my eyes. "Oh," Cassian murmured, just loudly enough to be heard. I believe he recognized my voice. I wanted to throw something at him, preferably the coffee machine. Instead, I pinched the bridge of my nose, silently wondering whether it was possible to die purely from embarrassment, because if it was, my obituary would read, "Claire Sterling, 26, survived years of family betrayal, only to be buried by one insufferable billionaire with impeccable timing." Ethan didn't speak. For several painfully long seconds, all that came through the phone was his breathing, sharp and uneven, as though he were trying to convince himself he'd heard wrong. The silence should have made me feel guilty. Instead, it only made the knot in my stomach tighten, because I already knew what was coming. Ethan never paused to collect himself before asking whether I was all right. He paused because he was calculating the damage, measuring the consequences, deciding how my actions reflected on him. Was that Cassian Blackwood? The question came out low, controlled, far calmer than the shouting from moments earlier. Yes. He went silent briefly. Then a humorless laugh escaped him. "So this is how you choose to embarrass me after everything your father has done for you?" My brows slowly drew together. Everything my father has done for me? The words felt almost absurd. What exactly has he done for me, Ethan? What? You heard me. His voice hardened immediately. "Claire, don't start. No, tell me." The room around me seemed to fade, until only his breathing remained in my ears. What has my father done for me? I don't have time for this. Neither do I. You disappeared from your own engagement gala. Our engagement gala. You're making this difficult. Something inside me gave a bitter laugh. Difficult. That word again. I had spent 26 years becoming whatever everyone needed me to be. The obedient daughter, the dependable executive, the quiet fiancé who smiled through business dinners while watching other people accept praise for projects I'd spent months building. Yet somehow, whenever I allowed myself the smallest crack in that carefully constructed image, I became difficult. My fingers tightened around the phone. "I asked you a question. I don't owe you an explanation. No." The word slipped out before I could stop it. "You owe me plenty." Behind me, the soft hiss of the coffee machine filled the suite, strangely soothing against the growing tension wrapping itself around my chest. Ethan exhaled sharply. "I'll overlook whatever happened last night." My heartbeat slowed. "You'll what?" I said I'll overlook it, as though he were offering me mercy. "As long as you leave that hotel immediately and come straight to the Sterling estate, we'll pretend this never happened." Pretend. Another familiar word. Pretend the board meetings where my ideas became my sister's achievements had never happened. Pretend the birthdays I'd spent working while everyone else celebrated had never happened. Pretend the engagement I'd never wanted had somehow become my responsibility to protect. Pretend, pretend, pretend. Perhaps I was still hungover. Perhaps exhaustion had finally stripped away whatever patience I'd been surviving on. Or perhaps, for the first time in years, I was simply tired of pretending. Ethan? What now? I'm not apologizing. His end went dead for a moment. Then, what did you say? I'm not apologizing for making sure I got home safely. You call spending the night with another man getting home safely? I never said you don't have to. His voice rose again, every carefully maintained layer of composure beginning to crack. The entire business community already knows you disappeared with him. The words landed like ice water. What? You heard me. No. A cold sensation crawled slowly down my spine. No, that's impossible. You honestly think nobody saw you leave? The phone suddenly felt much heavier in my hand. Fragments of memory flickered uselessly through my mind. Champagne, music, a ballroom spinning beneath crystal chandeliers, someone arguing, someone laughing, strong hands catching me before I stumbled, a familiar voice saying my name. Then, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Ethan. For the first time since answering the call, uncertainty crept into my voice. What exactly are people saying? He hesitated. That hesitation frightened me more than anything else he'd said. They're saying, he paused again, that you left the gala clinging to Cassian Blackwood. Every muscle in my body went still. No, that couldn't be right. I hated the man, didn't I? I looked up almost instinctively. Cassian hadn't interrupted once. He hadn't tried to defend himself. He hadn't even attempted to explain. He simply stood a few feet away, one hand resting lightly against the edge of the marble counter, watching me with an expression so calm that it was impossible to read. Too calm. Almost expectant. As though he'd known this conversation would unfold exactly this way. Ethan. My voice sounded strangely distant even to myself. Did you see me leave? No. The answer came immediately. I heard. He heard. Not saw. Heard. My mind caught on that tiny detail before anything else. You weren't looking for me? What? After I disappeared, the question escaped before I could stop it. Did you come looking for me? His silence was long enough to become an answer all by itself. My chest tightened, not because he'd confirmed my worst fear, because some foolish, stubborn part of me had still hoped the answer might be yes. Finally, I assumed you'd gone home. You assumed. What else was I supposed to think? A quiet laugh escaped my lips, small, disbelieving, broken. You knew I was drunk. You've handled yourself before. You knew I was upset. You were being emotional. You knew I walked out. You needed time. You knew I disappeared. There was a brief silence. Then, you always come back. The words shattered something I hadn't realized was still holding together. Not because they were cruel, because they were honest. He believed I'd always come back, always forgive, always endure, always accept whatever little affection people decided to spare me. And perhaps, until this morning, he'd been right.
His words lingered long after the call ended, not because they were louder than anything else he'd said that morning, but because they carried the quiet certainty of someone who had never imagined I might choose differently. The screen dimmed in my hand before slipping into darkness, leaving only my reflection staring back at me, pale, exhausted, and somehow older than the woman who had walked into the Sterling Foundation gala the night before, believing she could survive one more sacrifice for her family. A sigh escaped before I could stop it. It felt as though something invisible had finally broken, not dramatically, not all at once, but with the soft, almost inaudible crack of a thread that had been stretched far beyond what it was ever meant to endure. I suppose congratulations are in order. Cassian's voice pulled me back to the present. I looked up, still clutching the phone. For what? You finally stopped apologizing for other people's failures. A bitter smile threatened the corner of my lips before disappearing almost as quickly as it came. I don't know what you're talking about. You do. I really don't. He pushed himself away from the counter and crossed the room with the same measured confidence he seemed to carry everywhere, as though the world naturally rearranged itself to make room for him. There was never any unnecessary haste in the way he moved. He didn't need it. Every step felt deliberate, every glance calculated, every word chosen long before it left his mouth. It was one of the things that had always irritated me about him. Standing in front of me now, close enough that I could catch the clean scent of cedarwood lingering on his skin, he reached for the coffee resting untouched on the bedside table and placed it gently into my hands. Drink before your headache gets worse. You could have just said that. I just did. You know exactly what I mean. I usually do. I rolled my eyes, though the effort lacked any real conviction. The warmth of the mug seeped into my fingers, easing some of the chill I hadn't realized had settled beneath my skin. Outside, Manhattan had fully awakened. Yellow taxis streamed through the streets below like ribbons of gold. Distant sirens blended with the steady rhythm of traffic, and somewhere far beneath the towering glass buildings, life continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everything about my own life suddenly felt as though it had shifted a few inches off its axis, just enough that I couldn't find my balance anymore. What are you thinking about? The question caught me off guard. I wasn't aware you cared. I didn't ask because I care. No? I asked because you're staring out the window as though you're considering throwing yourself through it. That earned him the smallest laugh of the morning, one that slipped out before I had the chance to bury it beneath another sarcastic remark. The sound surprised both of us. My laughter had become so rare over the past few years that hearing it myself almost felt unfamiliar. There it is again. What? That laugh. It wasn't a laugh. It definitely was. It was an involuntary biological reaction. To me. Absolutely not. I'll accept partial credit. You deserve none. He looked entirely too pleased with himself, and I hated that my irritation no longer felt quite as genuine as it had an hour earlier. Somewhere between the teasing and the arguments, between waking up in his bed and realizing Ethan had never once asked whether I was safe, the sharp edges I'd always associated with Cassian had begun to blur in ways that made no logical sense. He was still arrogant, still infuriating, still entirely too confident for his own good. Yet beneath all of that was an attentiveness I couldn't ignore. He noticed everything, every shift in my expression, every hesitation before I answered a question, every moment I tried to pretend I was stronger than I felt. Most people looked at me and saw the Sterling heiress, or at least the woman they believed was fortunate enough to belong to the Sterling family. Cassian looked at me as though he saw the weight I carried long before I admitted it existed. The realization unsettled me enough that I set the coffee back down. I should leave. You probably should. I frowned. You're agreeing? You expected me to lock the doors? You expected... I don't know. You expected me to make this difficult, wouldn't you? He smiled, though it was quieter than before. Claire, if you choose to stay, I want it because you wanted to stay. If you choose to leave, no locked door in Manhattan would keep you here. For reasons I couldn't explain, that answer disappointed me.
The thought arrived so suddenly that I almost laughed at myself. Had I really expected the man I'd spent years calling insufferable insist I remain? Had some reckless, irrational part of me wanted to see whether the confidence everyone associated with Cassian Blackwood extended beyond boardrooms and business negotiations? The idea was absurd. And yet, the faint sting settling somewhere beneath my ribs refused to disappear. He noticed it. Of course he noticed it. You look disappointed. I do not. You've said that phrase quite a lot this morning. I've also meant it every time. What does mean? It means you're lying. I am not. You are. You seem awfully confident. I've spent enough time watching you to know when you're lying to yourself. The words settled quietly between us. Watching you. There was nothing unusual about the sentence. Rival executives observed one another all the time. The Sterling family had crossed paths with Cassian's company often enough over the years that it would have been strange if he hadn't noticed my habits. Even so, something about the way he'd said it lingered in the back of my mind. Not uncomfortable, not yet. Simply curious, like finding the first piece of a puzzle without realizing there were hundreds more waiting to be discovered. Before I could ask what he meant, another vibration echoed across the room. This time, it wasn't my phone. Cassian glanced toward the device resting on the marble counter, the screen illuminating with a name I couldn't read from where I sat. The amusement that had lingered in his expression disappeared almost instantly, replaced with the composed professionalism I'd seen him wear across countless boardrooms and press conferences. He answered after the second ring. "This is Blackwood." His voice changed. Not dramatically, just enough that anyone paying close attention would notice. The warmth vanished. The teasing disappeared. Only the billionaire remained. He listened without interrupting. His gaze drifted toward me once before returning to the skyline beyond the windows. "I'm aware," he said calmly. "Delay the meeting by an hour." A muffled voice answered from the other end. "No, don't release the statement until I approve it personally." Another pause followed, though this time his expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "I don't care what the shareholders are asking. They'll wait." He ended the call without another word. "What happened?" He slipped the phone back on the counter. "Nothing that concerns you." Something in his tone told me it concerned me more than either of us was willing to admit. That's an interesting answer. It happens to be the correct one. I've noticed you answer the question you're willing to answer rather than the one I actually asked. The board says the same thing. I can understand why. One corner of his mouth lifted ever so slightly before disappearing again. Whatever had been said during that phone call had clearly shifted something. The easy teasing that had filled the suite since I had opened my eyes had retreated beneath the polished composure the business world knew him for. And somehow I found myself missing it. The realization caught me completely off guard. Less than 2 hours ago, I'd kicked this man off his own bed, accused him of breaking into what I thought was my room, and seriously considered throwing a lamp at his head. Now the silence between us felt wrong. It shouldn't have mattered whether he smiled or not. It certainly shouldn't have mattered whether he was enjoying himself. Yet the room seemed strangely colder without that infuriating smirk. I really should go. You've already said that. I mean it this time. So did you the first two. I was serious. You were distracted. His gaze drifted briefly toward the garment bag resting neatly on the leather sofa before returning to me. Your clothes were cleaned and pressed early this morning. I assumed you'd want to leave without walking through one of Manhattan's most expensive hotels wearing my shirt. My eyes followed his. Only then did I notice the dark navy garment bag hanging from the edge of the sofa, my evening gown carefully zipped inside as though someone had taken considerable care to make sure it returned in perfect condition. Beside it sat my heels, polished, my clutch arranged neatly on top, every single item exactly where someone intentionally placed it, rather than carelessly tossed aside. You
I looked back at him. You had my dress cleaned? It smelled like champagne. You didn't have to. I know. You had my shoes polished? They were scuffed. And my bag? You left it in the car. A strange warmth settled quietly beneath my ribs. It wasn't the expensive hotel. It wasn't the coffee. It wasn't even the fact that he'd apparently spent part of his morning making sure every trace of last night's disaster had been quietly repaired before I'd even opened my eyes. It was that he'd noticed every little detail. The scuffed heels, the stained dress, the forgotten handbag. None of them were important. Yet somehow he'd treated them as though they were. People often assumed kindness had to arrive in grand gestures, dramatic declarations, or expensive gifts. They rarely noticed the smaller things. The person who remembered how you took your coffee, the one who quietly adjusted the air conditioning because you'd rubbed your arms once, the one who noticed your shoes were uncomfortable before you complained. Without realizing it, I found myself wondering how many little things Cassian had noticed over the years that I'd never seen. The thought barely had time to settle before I shook it away. Don't. His eyebrow rose. What don't? Start acting thoughtful. I wasn't aware I needed your permission. It makes you suspicious. I've been called worse. I preferred it when you were making fun of me. I can resume if that would make you more comfortable. It might. He nodded thoughtfully. In that case, your proposal last night lacked structure. Oh, for heaven's sake. You opened with an insult. I don't remember proposing. You followed it by complimenting my jawline. I groaned, covering my face with one hand. You are never letting this go. Absolutely not. I hate you. No. His answer came so quietly that I almost missed it. You don't. The certainty in his voice made me lower my hand. You seem remarkably confident. I'm usually am. What if you're wrong? His eyes met mine. I've been wrong before. Really? A handful of times. When? The first day we met. Curiosity got the better of me before pride could stop it. What happened? I thought you were arrogant. And now? I know you are. I couldn't help it. The laugh escaped before I could swallow it back. It wasn't forced, it wasn't polite. It was real. Cassian stared at me for a heartbeat, and something unreadable flickered across his face before he looked away toward the windows, almost as though hearing me laugh had affected him more than he'd expected. You know, I said, still smiling despite myself, you're impossible. I've heard. You genuinely enjoy provoking people. I enjoy provoking you. There's a difference? A considerable one. Why me? The question slipped out naturally, carrying none of the hostility that would have accompanied it only an hour earlier. Why me? Out of everyone he'd crossed paths with over the years, why did he always seem to single me out? Board meetings, charity galas, industry conferences, even chance encounters somehow turned into verbal sparring matches that left everyone around us looking thoroughly confused while we argued over things neither of us actually cared about. Cassian didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the skyline beyond the glass, where the morning sun reflected off the towers of Midtown in sheets of gold. Finally, he spoke. Do you remember the charity auction 4 years ago? I frowned. There have been dozens. The Metropolitan Children's Foundation. I searched my memory. A ballroom, hundreds of guests, endless speeches. Vaguely, you were wearing blue. That surprised me. You remember what I wore? Yes. You spilled red wine on me. Heat rushed to my face. That was an accident. It was. You deserved it. I had said good evening. You'd also called my presentation predictable. It was predictable. I spent 3 months preparing it. You should have spent 4. I rolled my eyes. There he is. The woman who threw wine at me. You were insufferable. You called me a corporate peacock. You deserved that too. I probably did. His admission caught me completely off guard. You agree? I was trying to provoke you. Why? Because, for the briefest moment, something almost vulnerable crossed his face before disappearing behind that familiar composure. You were the only person in that ballroom who looked at me like my money didn't impress me. The answer lingered in the air between us. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't flirtatious. It was simply honest. And somehow that honesty unsettled me far more than any teasing remark ever had. The words stayed with me far longer than they should have. New York was filled with people who admired Cassian Blackwood for one reason or another. Business magazines praised him, investors trusted him, rivals feared him. Women practically collected photographs of him the way other people collected art. Yet the one thing he claimed to remember from our first meeting was that I hadn't been impressed. It was ridiculous. It should have sounded like another one of his carefully crafted remarks, another attempt to throw me off balance before walking away victorious. Instead, it felt strangely sincere, and sincerity coming from Cassian was infinitely more unsettling than sarcasm. I still think you were a corporate peacock. I've matured. Barely. I've become considerably less insufferable. I'd hate to imagine the earlier version. You met the earlier version. I clearly survived. You threw wine at him. I maintain that he deserved it. I did. The agreement slipped from him so naturally that I blinked. You really enjoy admitting things I don't expect. I enjoy watching your face afterward. That's a terrible hobby. It has its rewards. You need better hobbies. I have them. Such as? You'll find out eventually. The confidence in his voice should have annoyed me. Instead, it made me curious. I hated that. Curiosity was dangerous. Curiosity made people ask questions they weren't prepared to hear the answers to. The safest thing I could do was leave, now, before this morning became any stranger. I stood, smoothing the oversized shirt almost absent-mindedly before realizing exactly what I was wearing. My cheeks warmed all over again. Cassian noticed immediately, though to his credit, he didn't make a single teasing remark this time. He simply walked toward the sofa, lifted the garment bag from its hook and carried it over before setting it gently on the edge of the bed. I'll wait outside. I looked up. You don't have to. I know. I've already embarrassed myself enough. I wasn't planning on watching. His expression remained perfectly neutral. I simply assumed you'd be more comfortable if I wasn't in the room. The realization caught me off guard. He wasn't teasing. He wasn't making one of his smug comments. He had genuinely thought about what would make me comfortable. Again. Thank you. His eyes lifted to mine for the briefest moment, and something softened so quickly that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. I'll be in the sitting room. The bedroom door clicked quietly behind him. For the first time since waking up, I found myself completely alone. The silence felt different now. Not awkward, not oppressive. Simply peaceful. I unzipped the garment bag slowly, expecting to find a wrinkled evening gown that had survived the night as poorly as I had. Instead, it looked brand new. Every fold had been pressed away. Even the tiny crystal missing from the waistline had somehow been replaced. My fingertips lingered against the fabric. I don't understand you. The words escaped into the empty room. Nothing about Cassian Blackwood made sense anymore. He was arrogant enough to tease me relentlessly for proposing to him while drunk, yet thoughtful enough to replace a crystal no one else would have noticed. He delighted in provoking me, yet stepped outside without my asking because he knew I'd feel awkward changing in front of him. He had spent years making my blood pressure rise every time our paths crossed, yet somehow knew exactly how I took my coffee without asking. None of it fit together. Not unless No, I shook the thought away before it could fully form. Getting dressed took longer than expected, partly because my head still throbbed, but mostly because I kept catching myself staring at my own reflection. The woman in the mirror looked almost exactly the same as she had yesterday evening. The same dark hair, the same tired eyes, the same elegant navy dress that had become my armor for another meaningless charity gala. Yet something had changed. Not outwardly, somewhere much deeper, as though one conversation had quietly shifted a foundation I'd spent years believing was unshakable. By the time I stepped into the sitting room, Cassian had changed into one of his impeccably tailored charcoal suits. The transformation was almost unfair. Most people looked tired after sleeping only a few hours. Cassian somehow looked as though he'd stepped straight out of a luxury magazine cover. The crisp white shirt, perfectly fitted jacket, and dark tie restored every inch of the intimidating businessman I'd grown accustomed to seeing across boardroom tables. He looked up from the tablet resting in his hand. There she is. I preferred you half asleep. I was winning the argument then, too. You'll never admit defeat, will you? I admit defeat when I've earned it. And have you today? Not today. I sighed dramatically. You're exhausting. So I've been told. His gaze traveled over me, not lingering inappropriately, not making me uncomfortable, simply checking that I looked all right. You look better. My headache disagrees. I had breakfast sent up. I blinked. What? You'll feel worse if you don't eat. I can buy breakfast on my way home. You could. He gestured toward the dining table. You could also eat the one that's already getting cold. Only then did I notice it. An entire breakfast had been laid out while I'd been changing. Fresh fruit, pastries, coffee, omelets, toast, even yogurt. Enough food for 4 people. You ordered all this? I wasn't sure what you'd like. I stared at the table before looking back at him. You don't know what I like. I know enough. Something in the way he said it made me hesitate. He walked toward the table and, without even glancing down, picked up a small bowl before placing it in front of the chair nearest me. No mushrooms. I frowned. What? You always leave mushrooms. How do you know that? You've done it at every business breakfast we've attended. A strange feeling settled over me. He continued as though he hadn't said anything unusual. You prefer strawberries over blueberries. I simply stared. You don't drink orange juice after coffee. Cassian, you always tear croissants apart before eating them. My heartbeat quickened. You dislike overly sweet pastries. He reached for a plate before moving it aside. And cinnamon rolls are too sweet. I hadn't said a single word. Couldn't, because every single thing he'd just listed was true. None of them were important. None of them mattered. They were the kind of insignificant habits people rarely noticed even after years of knowing someone. Yet somehow, Cassian Blackwood knew every one of them. He finally looked up. Only then did he seem to realize why I'd gone so quiet. What? I searched his face, suddenly unable to look anywhere else. How long? The question left my lips before I could stop it. How long have you been paying that much attention to me? Cassian didn't answer immediately. It wasn't the hesitation of someone searching for an excuse or scrambling to invent a believable lie. It was quieter than that, almost thoughtful, as though he were carefully deciding how much truth he was willing to place in my hands. His fingers rested lightly against the back of the chair opposite mine before he slowly pulled it out and sat down, never once looking away from me. The confidence he carried so effortlessly hadn't disappeared, but it had softened around the edges, leaving behind something unexpectedly human. Long enough. I frowned. That isn't an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Cassian. I noticed things because you were impossible not to notice. I folded my arms. I spent years trying not to notice you. You weren't subtle. I thought I was. You glared at me through every shareholders' dinner. I wasn't glaring. You once nearly broke a champagne glass because you disagreed with your projections. I disagreed professionally. You looked at me like you wanted to poison my coffee. I considered it. His lips curved into the faintest smile. I know. For reasons I couldn't explain, that answer made my own smile threaten to appear again. It was becoming increasingly difficult to stay irritated with him, and that realization alone was enough to make me suspicious of myself. Cassian Blackwood had spent years existing somewhere between my greatest professional rival and my biggest personal annoyance. That wasn't supposed to change over the course of one ridiculous morning simply because he'd made me coffee and remembered I hated mushrooms. You still haven't answered my question. I did. You avoided it. I refined it. There you go again. I've always watched people. I believe that. It helps in business. I'm sure it does. I simply watched you longer. The sentence settled quietly between us. There it was again. Not strange enough to challenge outright, not ordinary enough to ignore. Longer. How much longer? Since our first meeting? Since the charity gala? Since the engagement announcement? The questions gathered one after another in the back of my mind, yet none of them reached my lips. Something told me I wasn't ready for the answers, and judging by the careful way he was choosing his words, neither was he. You make it sound perfectly normal. It is. No, it isn't. You observe people too. Not like that. You know when your father is about to lose his temper. I blinked. You know your sister is lying. You know exactly how many seconds Ethan waits before pretending an idea was originally his. I stared at him. You've noticed all those things because you've spent years paying attention. The difference between us is that you observe people to survive. I observe them because I choose to. His voice never rose. It didn't need to. Every word landed with quiet certainty. I lowered my eyes to the untouched breakfast between us. The strawberries he'd placed on my plate suddenly seemed far more significant than they had a moment ago. It wasn't the fruit itself. It was the realization that somewhere, sometime, he'd noticed me pushing blueberries aside without me ever realizing anyone was watching. I searched for the right word. Unsettling. I've heard worse. I'm serious. So am I. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss my discomfort. He simply accepted it. I don't expect you to understand. I don't. You will eventually. The certainty in those last 3 words made me look back at him. You seem awfully sure of yourself. I've had time to think. And I haven't? No. Why not? Because everything changed for you last night. A strange feeling settled over me. What exactly changed? His gaze lingered on mine for a heartbeat before drifting toward the skyline beyond the windows. You just haven't realized it yet. Before I could press him further, another vibration echoed across the dining table. This time, it wasn't a phone call. A news alert illuminated the screen of my own phone, which I'd absent-mindedly placed beside my coffee. My name caught my attention before anything else did. I picked it up. My stomach sank. A photograph filled the screen. It had been taken outside the hotel sometime during the night. The image was slightly blurred, probably captured from across the street, but there was no mistaking the 2 people in it. Me and Cassian. My head rested against his shoulder, one arm loosely around his waist, while he held me upright as we walked toward the hotel entrance. His expression remained calm, almost protective, while mine looked completely unaware of the cameras pointed in our direction. Beneath the photograph, the headlines stretched across the screen. Sterling heiress spends the night with business tycoon just weeks before her wedding. My heartbeat stumbled. Another article had already appeared beneath it. Engagement in crisis. Claire Sterling leaves charity gala with Cassian Blackwood. There were more. Far more. Every major business publication, entertainment sites, social media, the photographs were spreading faster than I could scroll. Oh! The whisper escaped before I realized I'd spoken. Cassian reached across the table. He didn't take the phone away, he simply lowered the screen with one gentle movement until it rested face down against the polished wood. You don't need to read the comments. I wasn't going to. You would have. Probably. They're cruel. I know. No. His expression grew noticeably more serious. You know the people in your life can be cruel. His eyes held mine. You've forgotten what strangers are capable of. For the first time since waking up, genuine concern settled heavily in my chest, not for myself, but for the storm that was only beginning. Because if those photographs had reached the media this quickly, then the Sterling family had already seen them, which meant my father wasn't just looking for me anymore. He was waiting for me. And somehow, that thought frightened me far more than waking up in Cassian Blackwood's bed ever had. Cassian's hand remained over the phone for only a moment before he withdrew it again, leaving the screen resting face down on the table as though hiding it could somehow delay the inevitable. I found myself staring at the polished wood instead of reaching for it again because, deep down, I already knew what waited on the other side of those headlines. It wouldn't simply be speculation. By now, every article would have its own version of the story. Every photograph would be analyzed frame by frame. Complete strangers would confidently explain what kind of woman I was based on a single blurry image taken in the middle of one disastrous night. I need to leave. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Yes. No argument, no attempt to persuade me otherwise, just one quiet word. That somehow made leaving feel harder. I pushed my chair back and stood, smoothing the front of my dress more out of nervous habit than necessity. The fabric had been restored so perfectly that no one would ever guess it had been stained only hours earlier. Even the tiny tear near the hem, the one I'd never even noticed until now, had been repaired so carefully that I couldn't find where the stitching began or ended. You had this fixed, too. Cassian glanced briefly at the dress. It caught on the edge of a fountain. I frowned. A fountain? You don't remember. I don't remember half of yesterday. You insisted the fountain was judging you. Despite everything, I couldn't help smiling. Did I really say that? You gave it quite an emotional speech. I sincerely hoped it appreciated it. I don't believe fountains are particularly expressive. A soft laugh escaped me before I could stop it. It faded almost immediately as reality settled over us again. The headlines still existed, Ethan was still waiting, my father was almost certainly furious. None of those problems had disappeared simply because Cassian had managed to make me laugh twice in the same morning. He walked toward the entryway where my handbag rested on a narrow console table. Everything inside had been neatly arranged. My charger, lipstick, compact mirror, wallet, even the tiny notebook I carried everywhere had been returned to their proper places, instead of being carelessly shoved back inside. He lifted the bag by the strap before holding it out to me. I didn't go through your things. I know. You were concerned. I wasn't. You checked. I checked whether I had somehow lost my dignity in there. You lost that around midnight. I accepted the bag with an exaggerated sigh. I walked right into that one. You did. You enjoy this far too much. I enjoy watching you recover. The words slipped out so naturally that I almost missed them. Recover. Not suffer. Not panic. Recover. The distinction mattered more than it should have. You really weren't worried about me embarrassing you. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. Claire. The way he said my name stopped every other thought. I wasn't worried about me. Something tightened quietly inside of us. No teasing followed, no sarcastic remark, just the simple truth hanging between us with an honesty that felt strangely heavy. I've never seen you drunk before. I'm beginning to wish nobody had. You kept apologizing. The comment caught me off guard. I was apologizing for what? His jaw tightened almost too subtly to notice. For existing.
The words hit me so unexpectedly that I forgot to breathe. No, you apologized every few minutes. I searched his face, hoping to find some trace of exaggeration. There wasn't any. You apologized when the waiter brought the wrong drink. You apologized after someone bumped into you. The room suddenly felt much smaller. You apologized to me. I lowered my eyes. What did I say? His answer came so quietly that I almost didn't hear it. You said you were sorry for being difficult to love. My fingers tightened around the strap of my handbag. Somewhere deep inside me, something old and carefully buried shifted painfully. I didn't remember saying those words. That didn't make them any less believable, because there had been nights, many nights, when I'd thought exactly that, when every achievement had somehow become someone else's success, when every mistake had become entirely mine, when every sacrifice had been expected rather than appreciated. Maybe the alcohol hadn't created new thoughts. Maybe it simply unlocked the ones I'd spent years forcing back down. I shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have believed it. I looked up. His eyes never left mine. There wasn't a hint of pity in them, only conviction. As far as I'm concerned, his voice continued as calm as ever. The people who made you think that are the ones who should be apologizing. The air seemed to leave my lungs all at once. Nobody had ever said anything like that to me. Not once. Friends had told me to stay strong. Colleagues admired my work ethic. Even the few people who knew something about my family advised patience. No one had ever looked at me and suggested that perhaps I wasn't the problem. It was such a simple idea, almost frighteningly simple. You don't know my family. No, you don't know what it's like. I know enough. You don't. I know what happens every time your sister receives an award you earned. My head lifted sharply. I know your father introduces you to investors only after introducing everyone else. A chill crept slowly down my spine. I know Ethan interrupts you whenever a conversation becomes too favorable in your direction. I stared at him, unable to speak, unable to move, because every single thing he had just said was true. Things so subtle most people never noticed them. Things I'd convinced myself were too insignificant to matter. Things I'd quietly accepted as normal. Cassian had noticed every one of them. He took one slow step closer, leaving just enough space between us that I never once felt cornered. I also know something else. My voice came out barely above a whisper. What? You've spent so long believing you're invisible. A faint, almost melancholy smile touched his lips. That you never realized someone was always looking at you.